Thank you very much, Mandy. Thank you, Mahmoud, for organizing. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I think that he can learn from you the best knowledgeable and people of East Jerusalem and West Bank, Palestine are here in the room. And while writing the book, I was inspired by, for instance, Salim. I followed his method, and Salim Tamari, Professor Salim Tamari. I would like to tell you what the book is about and share with you a few of my conclusions and insights that I include here in the book. It's very hard to sum up a book in half an hour, especially a book like this one, which is very different from all my previous books that I published, which is not about political science. This is kind of, I would say, a portrait of Jerusalemites, Jaffa people and Hebronites, both Jews and Arabs, along 150 years, from the late 19th century up to date. The English edition was published about a year ago, 14 months ago. The Hebrew edition is just now in stores. And I'm very curious to see if the Hebrew readers, Hebrew reviewers will welcome it as the English readers did. So I would like to tell you what it's about and concentrate on Jerusalem. We are in Jerusalem, and I'm ready also to answer questions about Jaffa, but my presentation will be about Jerusalem. First, why I decided to choose these three cities, Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Hebron, and this triangle, which managed and still manage interrelations and relationship, very close relationship, in the center of the land. I do think that the history of Jaffa, Jerusalem, and Hebron expresses much of the history of the country, unlike what I call the North Triangle, which is Haifa, Nazareth, Akka, which is very different from the center of the country, two holy places, both for Jews and Muslims, one coastal city, the most important ones, up to Palestinian, most important Palestinian city up to 48 war, and which its history is forgotten. Nowadays, I think it's coming back gradually. I hope that Mahmoud Yazbak will soon finish his writing about the history of Jaffa, so we will once again enjoy knowing more about Jaffa. But the 48 war, during the war, afterwards, we lost much of the history of this important city. The book is about Jewish and Arab encounter. So I try to show how people encounter on everyday life in the bazaar, school, neighborhood, mixed marriage, religious festivals and holy places, etc. What kind of relationship the people in the street, in the neighborhood, developed, and how it changes along 150 years, and what are the differences between Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Hebron. And I try to look from, let's say, what is the view from the street, not the institutions, not the leadership, not the national movement. I bring in the national movements, but this is not the focus of my book. The focus of the book is the people. How the people encounter, what they feel, how they describe their everyday life, the meeting with the other, is there other, is the Jew or the Muslim, Christian, the Palestinian, is really the other when it became the other. I start in purpose at the end of the 19th century when both Jews and Arabs modernized, went out from the old city, built new neighborhoods, and then at that time national movements came from outside. Zionism came from outside. Arab nationalism came from the outside. But what happened when they, what they met on the ground when they came? They met a Palestinian identity, what I call local patriotism. And local patriotism was here before this nationality formulated in a movement. So there was here kind of an identity developing prior to the Jewish national movement, to the introduction of of Zionism and and Arab nationalism. People lived it as a matter of everyday life, much less as an ideology, formulated in literature, in poetry, in institutions, and so on. All this came later, but there was here, and I show that there was here a strong identity, local identity, Palestinian identity, belonging to the land and the people living nearby, not in the same neighborhood only, not in the same city only, as it was prior to modernism, but to a large, without fixed boundaries, because under the Ottoman Empire, the whole area was open, but there was a Palestinian identity of, okay, we are here sharing the same land beyond our city. We are part of something bigger than the city or the neighborhood or the village. Without having a fixed management called Palestinian administration or the British Mandatory of Palestine and so on. This will come much later. And Jews and Arabs shared this identity. Both Jews and Arabs were local patriots or Palestinian patriots at the same time, and then the national movements came, and I would say the project, Zionist project, as well as the Palestinian national movement project was at the end of, let's say, 48, perhaps a few years earlier, the project was to divide between Jews and Arabs, and each national movement developed exclusive claim to the land, exclusive local patriotism. The 48 war is actually the break. It's not simply, it's not a symbolic break, it's also a geographical and a very physical break that split between Jews and Arabs. And since then, the encounter between the two ethnic groups is very, very different. First in Jaffa, post-48 war, and then after 67, between Jews and Arabs here in Jerusalem and in Hebron. So in my view, I see 48 war as the fundamental break at the split, not 29 riots or 21 or 1919 or 1920 in Jerusalem. My finding, my reading of the primary sources that I include here brings me to the conclusion that it was a 48 war. Actually, the riots shaped the concept and the consciousness of the Zionist administration, the Zionist, let's say, settlements or the Zionist movement, but it has all of them, each of them has a very limited effect on everyday life. Everyday life changed between 45 and 48. Even in Jaffa, after the 36 half year of clashes, bloody clashes between Jews and Arabs, when the violent attacks, neutral violent attacks ended, Jews came back to live in Jaffa, to shop, to visit Palestinians from Jaffa. Big numbers went back to Tel Aviv, to the beach or to the casino to sell different vegetables or sabres in the summer and so on. So there are plenty of primary sources telling that the relations were back as previously. And the same happened in Jerusalem after 1919, 1920. Now I would like to show you, okay, this picture, this photo is very telling, not because of the cameras. This is a very oriental scenery here. It's perhaps tourists like it very much. But because of the shop signs, and this is just one picture, and if you go to the Library of Congress, the American Colony Collection, or you go to the Israeli National Photo Archives and search for Jerusalem 19th century Jaffa Gate, you will see that at the end of the 19th century were many shops or banks, ads or signs, not in Arabic but in English or in German. Let's say Deutsche Bank, Palestine, Deutsche Bank. Late 19th century, Palestine, Deutsche Bank. So it shows that the term Palestine was there, and so many tourists came, and that these signs were very attractive and relevant to the visitors. We know that towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, annually about 20,000, 22,000 pilgrimage per year visited Jerusalem. At a certain stage, at the end of the 19th century, the Russian compound hostel worked 24/7, open 24/7 to provide food to sell food and the beverages to the pilgrimage. So Jerusalem opened, and I must say that my conclusion is against the Zionist historians that write that only Jews modernized Jerusalem. Jews went out from the old city, and they don't count the Palestinians as modernizing Jerusalem. This is not true. Both Jews and Arabs, Palestinians, the Jews and Arabs, went out and then they welcomed the 20th century they built a modern Jerusalem and developed their joint local Palestinian identity. The old city was not divided along exclusive ethnic quarters. There were no exclusive ethnic quarters. People lived together. Now, I would like to show you a few sources that I included here in my book. How can I make it larger?
The writing is clear.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay.
The writing is clear. There's no need
Okay.
for example.
That's fine. That's, yeah, okay. Okay, just a minute. I hope that you can read this. Okay, Yaakov Elazar was born in the old city, and he described here the life in the old city. The old city was not divided along exclusive, as I said, exclusive quarters, but along compounds. And the compounds were shared by Jews and Muslims. From the late 19th century in Jerusalem, there was a Jewish majority, demographic majority, but most of the properties were owned by Muslims. So Jews had to rent houses or rooms and apartments from Muslims. In most cases, their rent was arranged in the Sharia code, but there were other cases which I bring in that it was arranged in the rabbinical code. No problem. For today, it looks like a dream, but this was the case there. And what is interesting here in this text is that the Muslim woman respected the request of the Jewish women. Here, although it created some problems, some preparation, extra preparation on Friday to take the water from the well for Saturday in Friday. Too much. And so it was very well respected. Here you can see how the relations were very, very close. It was much beyond the medieval cohabitation, much beyond. And the context is very different because it is not the medieval context of a religious division. It is in the context of local identity, which is belonging to the land, not belonging to the religious group only. So there is a religious identity. There is a religious belonging, but it has to share, or the identity is much greater. It includes also belonging to the land, belonging to the people you live nearby as one family. And the power of the religious identity is weakening as long as modernity takes over. And modernity entered in the late 19th century, early 20th century, very powerfully to Jerusalem and Jaffa. If we can see here, we can see here that religious belonging or religious commitments religious barriers are lowering. Swearing in the name of Moses and the holiness of the Ten Commandments, Muslim boys, and we were convinced when the boys wanted to, youth wanted to persuade their Arab Jewish neighbors of their sincerity. Yaakov Yoshua writes in his memories, they did so by swearing in the name of Moses and the holiness of the Ten Commandments, and we were convinced. Now, even see this of Menachem Klein, the two sons were enrolled in the Jewish Lemel School. Lemel School was a school not fully modern, in the midway between Jewish traditional, conservative, Orthodox, and secular school. So in Geula neighborhood in West Jerusalem. During the first decade of the 20th century, now, when the children entered 4th grade, when they began to study Mishnah, which is part of the Jewish Hadith, let's say, the principal accepted them, their pupils, from that class. The next day, Othman Effendi appeared at the school to lodge a complaint about this discrimination. He demanded that his sons take part in all classes. Okay? Starting 6th grade, the two boys also spent 4 hours a week learning Talmud. That's it. It's the religious barriers were not so high as in the medieval area. This is part of modernization and living together. Now, I would go even further, which is a very interesting Nebi Musa. Okay, you know the importance of Nebi Musa and for the Muslims, for the Jerusalem identity, for the local Palestinian identity, Central Palestine identity, bring it together from Hebron south and Nablus north, and building a joint community of local patriots, etc., etc. How Jews perceive Nebi Musa celebration. I quote from the book, and here you can see a quotation from Yaakov Yoshua memoirs. Yaakov Yoshua is what I call Arab Jew, and he is the father of the novelist A.B. Yoshua. A collection of his writing on Arabs is forthcoming in Hebrew in few weeks, reprinted. He published many volumes on memoirs, very important but very neglected by Israeli historians, on his childhood and life in Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem. What is interesting here, he described the Nebi Musa celebration when they entered the city on their way down to Nebi Musa, and when they came back, everybody went out to welcome the procession. And as a Jew, he described what he and his fellows felt towards Nebi Musa procession. Oops. We imagine that the inhabitants of Hebron and the surrounding village, who, according to legend, a Jewish legend, were the descendants of the Jews who had remained in the Holy Land after the destruction of the Second Temple. There is a kind of a legend, you can hear it even today, that they were making their pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. It's not what we can learn from this perception is that Yaakov Yoshua, while watching the celebration, is not a tourist. He's not an anthropologist looking, or a tourist visiting let's say, the Carnival in Venice or the Carnival in Rio. But he brings the celebration and the people into the Jewish context, seeing it as part of his tradition and identify himself and his history with the celebration. This is very, very telling. It's not something that happens out of his mind, history, and tradition. It's part. He tries to bring it and to be part of it. Another source is about what happened in 1919, where there were riots in Jerusalem during the Nebi Musa, riots against the Zionists and the Brits. So Ezra Menachem, who also is an Arab Jew born in the old city, he writes, youth and old men reported in the early morning at the gate in the wall to receive the celebrants with cheers. The same happened, by the way, in Hebron. The Jews were part of the celebration also in Hebron. And they passed through the Jewish alleys to the sounds of drums and cymbals. The Jews celebrated as they came, sprinkled rose water on them. 1919, okay, the Jews kept their stores half closed, they were afraid, and so just a few days went by, okay, and life got back on track. Jews and Arabs again met with each other and both apologized for the split blood. Life was much stronger than before. Actually, the split was, as I said, in 48, and in 48 it was very difficult for those who lived together with Palestinians to acknowledge that, okay, we have to part, we have to depart. Palestinians to live in West Jerusalem, Jews to live areas in North Jerusalem. One very telling and very moving example is the story of the Mukhtar, Mukhtar of Talbiyah. So, in South Jerusalem, Talbiyah, Baqa, Katamon, in all this area, about 22,000 Palestinians live, and about 500, less than 600 Jews and live together. The Brits appointed Reuven Mas as the Jewish Mukhtar of Talbiyah, and Ibrahim Kabani was the Arab Mukhtar, and they issued the residential permits, birth certificates for the community. Mas arrived in 33. Now, in April 48, when there was the battle over Katamon, the Palestinians left and fled from South Jerusalem. Reuven Mas, as the Mukhtar, issued, he was approached by the heads of the Jewish agency to let Jews, some of them refugees, many of them fighters or friends of the leadership and so on, to let them take the Palestinian houses. So Mas issued a newcomer's housing receipt certificate. He issued it voluntarily. And he wrote down who took which room, apartment, or a house. And the residents were required to care for the furniture of the home and keep watch over the closed rooms where belongings of the Palestinians left behind them and were collected. Okay. Now let's move a little bit down. Which is one even further. The Jewish residents also obliged themselves on the certificate to vacate the property within 1 month if the legal owners so demanded. It was voluntarily. Reuven Mas issued this and asked everyone to sign. All the documents, the signed documents, are in the East Jerusalem municipal archives. I found them, I saw them. There is a big file kept in Mas personal archives and there is a registry who took which apartment and so on. And he made it voluntarily. Later on, he published he wrote in the memoirs these lines. In keeping with the good relations we had with the Arab population here, I demanded then that we preserve Arab property. Okay. We closed up that room with wax, and the family that moved in had to sign that they would not live in that part of the property, etc. We guarded this Arab belonging for 3 years. 3 years later, our government found itself in immediate need for rules for additional immigrants and refugees, and the government officials were sent to transfer all the belongings to warehouses. What happened to them in the end, I have no idea. It was taken, okay? Of course. Now, what is interesting here is that Reuven Mas did it first as a Jewish Mukhtar to Palestinian houses, not to the Jewish houses only. also to the Palestinian houses. So it's beyond his responsibility as a mukhtar. It was in April 48, but his son, Danimas, was killed already in January 48 by Arab mobs in the way of the 35, the convoy of the 35 Jewish Haganah fighters, Palmach platoon from Jerusalem, in Beit Tzurif, between Jerusalem and Etzion block. In January, he made it in April, 3 months maximum afterwards, and still he hoped that the Palestinians will come back when he made it. In his mind, it was impossible to imagine that this is forever or for long. Never mind, forever or for long. In his mind, as a person who shared Jerusalem with Palestinians, it was temporary. And he made voluntarily all the arrangements, even though that his son was killed by Arabs a few weeks earlier. He made it, and it shows very powerfully that this element of joint identity and living together was very, very strong, and the division was very brutal and very painful for both of them. Another story is that of which I also write about is the story of Ora Achimeir parents. They were refugees from North Jerusalem near the French Hill. They were caught in fire and were forced to evacuate. And they were offered an apartment in Talbiyah, or Katan. And her mother and father started debating whether to take it or not. Her mother was a widow. Her first husband was killed in Tzfat in 29, few days after marriage. And she was in favor of taking a Palestinian evacuated house. Kind of revenge, kind of what they would have done to us if the Palestinians win in 48 war or occupy West Jerusalem. But what is very interesting is what her father said. Her father decided, no, we will not, and they rented an apartment in Ben Yehuda Street. And her father, as she remembers, said, better to live in poverty than to live well on the ruins of others. So this was also part there in Jerusalem at that time. The tragedy is, what happened later, and after 48, and especially after 67. The typical case that I pick up from the book is the encounter, argument between Ishaq Musa al-Husseini, the historian, and Yaakov Yoshua, saying Yaakov Yoshua that I spoke about I used his memoirs earlier. Yaakov Yoshua, as I said, was an Arab Jew. His memoirs and personal papers are here in the Jerusalem Municipality Historical Archive. And in '67, he was the head of the director of the Muslim department in the Ministry of Religions. And he was in charge of all the khutbah, Friday khutbah in all the mosques in the state of Israel. All of the sudden, '67 war ends. Israel occupies also the West Bank, Jerusalem, annex East Jerusalem, and then Al-Aqsa Mosque comes under Yaakov Yoshua. And this is a very interesting debate that was there in the Israeli administration, whether Yaakov Yoshua will censorize the khutbah, the Friday khutbah of Al-Aqsa Imam or not, and it was taken from him and given to David Farhi and Moshe Dayan, assistant, and others, because Yaakov Yoshua became very, very radical and pro-Zionist and so on. And we can see here in the encounter. Ishaq Musa al-Husseini was his friend. They studied high school together here in Jerusalem and also the Cairo University together, and worked in the education department of the Mandat administration all together. They were very close friends. After the war, Ishaq Musa al-Husseini came to Yaakov Yoshua, hoping that Yaakov Yoshua will help him, and he told Yaakov Yoshua, asking him to get a permission to be a Jerusalem, to have a blue ID. For a reason, Ishaq Musa al-Husseini was outside Jerusalem when the census was made. And he said to Yoshua, I put all my savings into the houses and lost it all. And asked him for some help. Okay? So Yaakov Yoshua, what Yaakov Yoshua has to tell him and write in his memoirs and papers, I sent him to Shmuel Yeshaya, the district officer. That's it. Go to X and ask him. Okay. I assume that you are very well experienced with such answers.
They put it elegantly, big go.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then they continue in another meeting. They continue to speak or to debate. And Yoshua offered Hussein, I call it, offered Hussein a lesson from Jewish history in the Muslim world. See what came to Yaakov Yoshua's mind. It seems that you have not yet grasped the new concept of the Jew. The creature that you disdained in the past has become a brave warrior, speaks the Arab Jew, now representing Zionism. Okay? A tank soldier, a pilot, etc. To his friend from Al-Fuad, Thani University and the St. George Hill School. So Husseini replied that we had Maimonides among us. A very classical argument, a counter argument, you know. Apparently, Yoshua reacts, and apparently the honor that here I add, the Muslim accorded to a few Jewish scholars was indicated not of the real respect of the Jews, but rather the Muslims' strong position of wealth Okay, thank you. And power. He refuses to accept the argument that we have, Maimonides, that it's part of our tradition and philosophy. And then in 72, once again, he resubmitted the request to Yoshua. And he writes Yoshua in his private paper. I spoke about it with the Prime Minister Advisor on Arab Affairs, Shmuel Toledano, and the chances are very small. That's what he told Ishaq Musa Hussein. Later on, Yoshua writes, I am very moved by those asking for permission to come live in Jerusalem, and I stand helpless before them and do not know what to tell them and how to explain the government's refusal to them. But this is few years after. The immediate answer of Yoshua, the first answer was, see, we are warriors, we are...
Heroes.
The classical Zionist arrogance. Only later, he remembers...
He became wiser.
He became wise and he left office, actually. For me, it was a very tough moment, but this he wrote much later, not in real time. So here you see the tragedy. What happened to an Arab Jew, authentic Arab Jew?
May I ask when he wrote that? What year?
This was after 72, I think in 74 or so, he wrote this, the end, okay? When he was out of office, he retired already. And so, shortly after the war, the big victory brought the Arab Jew to become full Zionist and endorse the classical Zionist perspective. Arrogancy, of course, and leaving behind all what they had in common with the Arabs, especially a friend of, let's say, about 40 years. They were close friends and colleagues. They studied together and worked together. So this, it shows what reflects very, very well in one incident, in two persons, what happened to in Jerusalem after 67. And actually, the situation today is not much better, as you know. Now, so the book is, in the book I try to tell this kind of this big story through incidents or quotations, private papers, archives, memoirs, that people, and keep, I try, and I hope I succeeded, to keep the voice of the people in the street. Not to destroy them with, social science generalizations, or sorry for the social scientist here and the anthropologist and so on, but they kill the sources. I try to keep them alive. And last but not least, I found much more Israeli, Hebrew, Jewish Hebrew sources than Palestinian sources, unfortunately. And
Palestinians don't like to write a lot.
Unfortunately.
We know it from father to son. For us, what you wrote is already we know from our ancestors, from my father, from my grandfather. We know all this.
A few months ago, I shared some of my conclusions with the Palestinian colleague, and he told me, "Wow, really, it happened? What you described? It really happened?" I used to hear these stories from my grandmother, and I thought that she, old person, and she just bluffing me, imagine, and so I have a very Oriental imagination and so on. But I'm very happy that you found it in writing. So if I have a message to you, is publish private papers, photographs, memoirs, everything. Publish. It's your history, it's our history, it's Jerusalem history, and it should be in public. So please do it, because this kind of stuff, of papers, changes what we know about the place. Actually, it changes. And it's not enough that you know it inside your family. It goes from grandmother to daughter to grandchildren. It has to be in public, because it's your history, it's our history, and Jerusalem's history. Okay.